Dr. Robert Maurer is going to speak to us this morning about the small steps you take to create transformation and change. So we got to experience something this morning, the red carpet being rolled out, and something transformational in your life that you're creating in the future. And Dr. Maurer is going to talk to us about the steps it takes to get there. So a little bit on his bio so I don't forget anything. He is a clinical consultant for the Family Practice Residency Program at Santa Monica UCLA Medical Center and a faculty member on the UCLA School of Medicine. Dr. Maurer has studied how individuals, families, and organizations sustain their excellence in health, relationship, and work. His presentations on success have reached audience as diverse as corporations, hospital patients and staff, theatrical companies, governmental agencies, and the U.S. Navy. He has served as a consultant to Walt Disney Studios, the U.S. Air Force, Canyon Ranch Health Spa, Habitat for Humanity, appeared on 2020 in connection with his work on conflict resolution, articles in the Los Angeles Times. He's created a new book, One Small Step Can Change Your Life. He has just done oodles and oodles and oodles of things. So we are very, very excited to have him here today. Please give a big round of applause to our presenter, Dr. Robert Maurer.
Thank you. It's a joy to be back here again, to feel the love in this room and to see a world that my amazing brother lives in and has brought so much love and support to his life. So thank you for having me. The work that I want to share with you briefly this morning has come out of the work that you were talking about, and that is we've been collecting research from around the world on people who succeed in jobs, health, and relationship, sustained over long periods of time. The shortest study is 15 years. Longest study, 45 years, and some of the corporate studies are 100 years older, looking at what allows people to sustain excellence in all three areas of life, health, relationship, and career. And one of the concepts we came across was how successful people create and sustain change, and came across a concept called Kaizen. How many of you have heard the term before? Great. It's an ancient Asian philosophy, although it goes back, we think, even before some of the Asian writing. But ironically, we can find no evidence of its application until World War II, when a group of Americans, including a man named Dr. Edward Deming, were very interested in improving the quality of military equipment and began using this concept of Kaizen. Now, it has two definitions. The one we'll start with is is that they make a distinction between what we think of as the Western notion of change, innovation, taking the largest possible steps in order to accomplish large goals. And innovation is good. If I ask you to list all the things in life you wanted, why would you 1 minute longer than necessary to accomplish them? If we can take big steps and accomplish big goals, terrific. But as we've all experienced, it's not always practical, not always possible. And what we found is successful people could fall back on a second strategy, which again has two definitions. The one we'll start with for Kaizen is very small, trivial steps in order to accomplish large goals. So innovation, the largest possible step in order to accomplish a large goal. Kaizen, the smallest, most trivial step in order to reach the same objective. So let me just give you a couple examples of Kaizen because it defies common sense. American Cancer Society, very interested in getting people to donate money for cancer research. So they came up with a standard pitch they were using door to door to get people to donate. And it was reasonably effective. Roughly 40% of people were donating, average donation $3. They then added Kaizen, a small trivial step at the end of their sales pitch. And the small step was even a penny will help. Can't get any more Kaizen than that, right? It's the smallest denomination we've got. Well, the rate of donation went from 40% to 60%. Think, well, so what? The rate of donation went from $3 to $5. Very strange. Second set of studies done originally in Tucson and then at 5 other sites where they took a census tract where people were as homogeneous as they could find in terms of race, culture, education, income, number of children, that stuff. Divided the census tract in half. Neighborhood A, we left you alone the first day of the month. Neighborhood B, not so lucky. Volunteer knocks on each door. Says automobiles are a major health hazard in the United States. Over 40,000 people are killed every year in car accidents, hundreds of thousands more injured. Would you be willing to put this little sticker on the front window of your house, about 3 inch by 3 inch, that says, be a safe driver, to remind people of this important health habit? On average, 87% of the people in neighborhood B agreed to this modest request. Now, 2 weeks later, another volunteer knocks on the doors of neighborhood A and B. Same pitch, automobiles are a major health hazard, da-da-da-da-da. Only now the request is a bit more dramatic. Would you be willing to let us put a billboard in the front yard of your house? Don't you wish you thought of stuff like that? Would you be willing to let us put a billboard in the front yard of your house that says, be a safe driver? And just so there's no doubt what they were asking, they held up a photograph. This billboard was so huge it would dwarf your house for a month. No sunlight for 30 days. On average, 17% of the people in neighborhood A's agreed to this ridiculous request. Wouldn't you love to sell them something? On average, 75% of the people in neighborhood B's agreed to this request. Having made the 3-inch commitment, they were 4 times more likely to make the large commitment. Third set of studies been done everywhere from Pittsburgh to Ireland. They go into a huge high-rise building. They take a dozen of you on the 7th floor, say in a banking firm, who haven't exercised since high school, and even then, only under duress. Tell you the importance of the American Heart Association recommendations, 3 to 5 times a week, 30 to 50 minutes. And congratulations, you've been given a free membership at the health club across the street. Another gift certificate for your workout clothes, and another for your trainer. Have a great life. We go to the 11th floor, find 12 of you in a law firm. Again, 12 who haven't exercised since high school. Same information on heart disease and exercise. Only now we ask you just to go into the stairwell of the building, go up the next flight of stairs, back down again, back to your desk, go back to work. On Tuesday, go in the stairwell, 1 flight of stairs, add 1 step. Wednesday, 2 steps. You get the idea. Each of the 5 days of the work week, adding 1 step to this ridiculous regimen. Come back 1 year, 3 years, 5 years later, which group do you think is exercising better with better weight loss, cardiovascular fitness, and lower cholesterol? The steppers in every study. And one of the 2 handouts on your table looks at the health benefits of losing 1 pound and the health benefits of exercising 1 minute. So in our 70mm Dolby extreme makeover culture, we tend to ignore some of the most powerful processes for change, and that's small steps. So I hope that after today, this quote that you've all seen before, you will never look at the same again. Now, how many of you have had the same idea, have had the same experience Albert had? One morning you're shaving, you're putting on your makeup, you're driving to work, you're in the shower, and you get the answer to a problem. Can I see a show of hands? Do you know how you did that? Well, we don't either. Nobody knows how the brain creates an idea. It's one of the great mysteries left in brain science, among others. But there's a couple things we think are happening. Let's back up. What did Dr. Deming do with this concept of Kaizen? Again, Dr. Deming, a statistician before the war, very involved in quality control during the war. After the war, the Japanese invited him over during their reconstruction, and small, struggling firms like Honda and Toyota and Fuji used his remarkable concepts to build products that are now the highest quality in the world. So what Dr. Deming did is he went into Toyota after World War II. They were virtually bankrupt. They had not been successful even before World War II in building cars. And suppose all of you work for Toyota, I'm your immediate supervisor, and I stand up in front of you and say, what are you going to do to make Toyota the greatest car company in the world? Now, in that tone of voice, what emotion does that trigger in you? Fear, yes? What does fear do to creativity, up or down? Down. Second chapter of Dr. Deming's textbook is called Getting Fear Out of the Workplace. The second thing Dr. Deming suspected that we also believe to be true today, for reasons no one understands, is in some ways the brain is just like a computer. Not surprising, the brain invented it. But in some ways, they're very different. For example, if I sat down at that laptop and tried to print myself out a Pennsylvania lottery ticket, how long am I going to be here? Till your next meeting. It's not, all it's going to say is error, refuse. The brain will reject any question it doesn't have hardware or software for. The brain's not that smart. Any question the brain is asked repeatedly, it's forced to take in. So if we were here, for example, every day for a week, this was a week-long workshop, and I know you all drove here today, and I said to you, what color car is parked 2 cars to the right of you in the parking lot? Now, besides thinking that's the dumbest question you've ever been asked, how many of you admit you haven't the foggiest idea? Now, if I ask you that same useless question a couple more times this morning, tomorrow when we get together, tomorrow at lunch, by the 3rd or 4th day of our seminar, driving in here with far more important things on your mind, a place in the brain that decides what to store and retrieve, called the hippocampus, is going to say to you, that fool's going to ask you again about the color of the car, and you'll be forced to store an answer in short-term memory. The brain cannot reject a question. Now, it's a little bit off our topic for today, but if you're one of those folks who's a bit hard on yourself, and you go through the day with questions like, what's wrong with me? Why am I such a loser? How come everyone else has life easier than me? How come I'm such a jerk? Then with those questions is there's no place in the brain that goes, error, I refuse to answer that question. You wouldn't ask your worst enemy that question. That's mean. The brain doesn't talk back. Instead, questions like that, asked repeatedly, the brain decides you must be serious and starts developing columns of cells. So when you ask for the umpteenth time, why am I such a loser? The brain says when you were 7, you were rude to your grandmother. When you were 11, you shoplifted. It has all this stuff stored, painful, often exaggerated, or worthless. The good news is you change the questions, you change what the brain stores. So what Dr. Deming did is he asked each Toyota worker just to ask themselves a question once a day. What small, trivial step could I take that may in the long run improve the process or product? Just ask the question. His thought being, because the question was small and trivial, it wouldn't trigger fear. And because it was a question, the brain would be forced to take it in, and you'd have thousands of workers sitting there trying to figure out how to make small improvements in this large process of building a car. Now, the power of this, we have data, the latest data is unfortunately 1997. The average U.S. automobile worker makes 3 suggestions every 2 years to his or her employer. Average reward, $450 per suggestion. Average Toyota worker, 200 suggestions per year. Average reward, $3.17. Because Dr. Deming, being a parent, knew that you didn't have to reward children with vast sums of money to be curious, creative, productive, energetic, that people show up wanting to participate, contribute, wanting to be proud of what they do at the end of the day. The bigger you make the rewards, the more you're encouraging people to look for what they think will be huge ideas that are going to get them huge results. And if I've got a good idea, I'm not going to want to share it with Trish because she might take the idea and run with it. For $3, I'm likely to share it with her so that what we end up taking to our manager is far better than what I could do on my own. Over 85% of the suggestions Toyota workers make, because they're so small and trivial, can be implemented because they don't cost anything or very little. So Einstein's theory of relativity, he got what for him was a small, trivial question he asked himself one day while bored in a classroom. The brain took the question in and in its own magical way popped out answers on its schedule, not ours. So we think there's 4 advantages to Kaizen. One is it trains the brain. We think this is the way the brain learns best. Second, it allows time for skill to develop. We think, again, it fits biology. Let me give you an example of this. If I was to ask you today, what's the greatest invention in the history of the world? The one invention more responsible for the quality of life today than any other. I know you've been asked this before. What would be your answer? I obviously don't have the divine answer, but what's any thoughts?
The wheel.
The wheel? Printing press. Women. See me afterwards. Now again, I don't have the answer, but my contribution, based on my reading of medical history, would be the vaccination has saved hundreds of millions of lives. In the 1600s, 1700s in Europe, when smallpox came along, it would kill 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 people at a time. By some estimates, a third of Europe. We don't even worry about airborne diseases anymore because of the miracle of the vaccination. Now, if you accept that, what's the point of it? Well, it took 400 years to convince Europeans to give it a try. Not knowing about immune systems, it makes sense they would be a little reluctant to take something that could kill them and put it in their bodies deliberately. But what's the principle underneath a vaccination? We're going to give you a trivial amount of something so small that it couldn't possibly hurt you so that the immune system in this intensely small context can learn how to cope with it, so when the large problem comes along, the immune system has developed the skills. So we think it fits the physiology of the body a lot better. John Wooden, you may know, by many measures the most successful athletic coach in world history. UCLA's basketball coach, an 80% lifetime record, 11 world championships, 7 in a row, 88 games without a defeat. We were interested in him not only because of that remarkable record, but he himself still alive in his 90s, a remarkable marriage of over 50 years. And the players who played for him, almost all of whom went on to careers in anything but basketball, say he changed their lives by the way he taught them. And this is just one quote. My players would probably tell you they never heard me mention winning. I don't think scores indicate you won or lost. I wanted them to work each and every day to improve themselves. When players came to him the best of school class, he spent the entire first week teaching them how to tie their shoes. If you see the latest video he made, he talks about this in the video. Now, how many times do you think these young men had tied their shoes before they got to UCLA's basketball team? But he knew that basketball, like life, was a series of mastering fundamental basic skills. If I can teach them to put on their socks correctly, tie their shoes appropriately, the chances of them developing a blister are reduced. One blister could take them out of the game. When you talk to his players, again, 20 years later, ministers, priests, lawyers, CPAs, doing all kinds of work, anything other than basketball. They tell you whether it was their work, their marriage, taking care of their body, they broke it down into the smallest steps they could and learned it one step at a time. Pat Riley, the famous National Basketball Association coach, and I focus you on the part in bold. We challenge each player to put forth enough effort to gain just 1 percentage point in each of these 5 areas. We found this commonly in the success research, people challenging themselves to improve 1%. Now, what's the beauty of a 1% goal? Is a 1% goal going to send you into fear? Not very likely. How do you make sure you stop at 1%? You can't. Third, increasing pleasures in daily life. When your friend says to you, what's new, are they interested in the flower you saw on the way to the car, or the giggle you heard from a child at a shopping mall, or do they want some large, juicy 70mm Dolby story to amuse themselves with? As we were reminded briefly after 11 and often during crises in our lives, life is made of these small moments that we let pass us. Norman Lear, the famous TV producer, said this much better than I can. Success is how you collect your minutes. You spend millions of minutes to reach one triumph, one moment, then you spend maybe 1,000 minutes enjoying it. If you're unhappy through those millions of minutes, what good is the 1,000 minutes of triumph? It doesn't equate. How many successful people end up in suicides? Life is made of small pleasures. Good eye contact over the breakfast table with your wife, a moment of touching a friend. Happiness is made of those tiny successes. The big ones come too infrequently. If you don't have all those zillions of tiny successes, the big ones don't mean anything. I don't know what my relationship to society is. Are people less bigoted than they were before All in the Family, a TV show many of you recall that he produced? But if there's one thing I want my children to learn from me, it's to take pleasure in life's daily small successes. It's the most important thing I've learned in 57 years. Any of you, again, who are around small children know this is the world they live in, taking their pleasure and their anguish from what's happening just that moment. It's certainly not that they're more spiritually evolved than us. It's that their brains are so much smaller. They haven't developed 2 other sets of software that were life-saving for us before civilization. The software that allows us to remember the past and anticipate the future. Gifts that allowed us, when we came out of our cave, to remember what direction the hostile tribes were in, or where the lions might be, and anticipating where the water could be. Those gifts allowed us to survive. But given all the protection of civilization, we tend to use that software to live in regrets of the past and worry about the future, and have trouble bringing us back to just the joy and the pleasure with each breath. Robert Johnson, a psychiatrist in San Diego, said the same thing. We have forgotten that simplicity is a need in human life. It's the human art of finding meaning and joy in the small, natural, and less dramatic things. At its highest, it's a consciousness that sees through the confusions we invent to the essential, uncomplicated reality of life. If a direct, uncomplicated, simple relationship offers us happiness, we won't accept it. It's too simple, too dull. We're trained to respect only what is inflated, hyper-intense, high-pressured, big and complicated. Michael Landon, shortly before his death, someone should tell us right at the start of our lives that we're dying. Then we might live life to the limit every minute of every day. Do it, I say. Whatever you want to do it now. There's only so many tomorrows. This is not a plea for innovation, that because life is short, take large, desperate steps, but because life is short, take pleasure in each step, each moment. Now, a second definition we got when we began studying the creative process. How did successful organizations create their next product or service? How did successful artists, writers, business people create their ideas? What we found is it was very hard to find these great aha moments, some kind of divine intervention that took place with the sky opening in one instant. Instead, it seemed to be small moments, too small for other people to pay attention to. This person thought this small moment was worth perhaps a second look. Let's just give you a trivial example first. E.L. Doctorow, one of America's greatest living novelists, this was the research on his next to last novel. The research I do, well, just enough research. I wouldn't even call it research, even though I do some reading, take some walks. A key evening in the imaging of the waterworks came when I was just looking out the window, and a fog began to descend on the city. It started moving slowly down, eliminating the World Trade Center, the Woolworth Building, the 20th century. Finally, what was left was the 19th century. I was looking out at the village, and then went walking on Lower Broadway, and I thought, this is Melville's New York you're looking at. Is that research? Again, a small, trivial moment that inspired this person to other thoughts. Let's take a look at some other trivial moments. The internet we got from 3 or 4 scientists trying to figure out how to talk to each other faster than through publications, which could take a year. eBay from a gentleman trying to help his girlfriend sell her Pez dispensers. Remember those little candy things? thought maybe he could use the internet for that. The credit card from 2 attorneys in New York City went out to dinner. One insisted on paying the check, reached for his wallet, realized it was home in his other pair of pants, excused himself, went and called his wife, who rushed his wallet down, thought about that moment's embarrassment in a restaurant, and thought there's got to be a better way to deal with restaurant bills, and Diners Club was invented that night. Posted from a gentleman at 3M who was in a church choir, and the markers in the hymnal kept falling out. And he was getting kind of annoyed at this and remembered a failed glue at 3M, thought maybe this might be useful. It took him a few years to convince 3M maybe it was worth a try. The Band-Aid from a gentleman at Johnson & Johnson loved his wife's cooking, but she had a habit of cutting herself frequently while cooking. Thought one day while trying to be useful he'd invent something to stop the bleeding. Baby powder from Johnson & Johnson. Some of us in the room are old enough to remember when you got one of those bandages at the doctor and went to take it off, some of your hair came with it. They used to include a little bit of talc just to ease your pain after the Band-Aid did its job. One day this huge Fortune 500 company got one letter from one doctor saying, could you skip the bandage and just send the talc? And they thought maybe there's a product there. Schindler's List. How many of you saw the movie or read the book? Do you know the story how it got made? An Australian writer stopped in Beverly Hills to get the grip on his luggage fixed. The man behind the counter while fixing his luggage was talking this poor writer's ear off. This man, one of Schindler's survivors who had promised Schindler the story would not die, had been living in the heart of the movie capital of the world for 15 years, could not get anyone interested in this small story. Barcodes which have revolutionized virtually every industry, from a gentleman trying to figure out how to help grocery checkers resolve their, or increase the pace, and could not figure out what to do. One day in frustration he went to the beach, sitting there poking his hand in the sand in frustration, took his hand out, noticed the sand sticking to the creases in his hand, thought that's it. The Simpsons, one of the longest running shows on TV, a 3-minute piece on the Tracy Ullman show, somebody thought maybe it was worth more than 3 minutes. Viagra from a cardiac drug that failed, somebody wondered why. Penicillin from a mold growing on the side of a dish, somebody got curious about, and the microwave from a gentleman at Raytheon who put his chocolate bar down too close to a radar screen. It began to melt, and he got curious about what that was about. So small, trivial moments that ended up obviously not so tall. So our second definition, the first one, small, trivial steps to accomplish large goals. The second, looking at very small moments to learn large lessons. And the fourth is comfort in overwhelming crisis. Crisis, as you know, defies innovation. If you could take a big step and get the relationship back or your health back or the financial error, whatever it is, it's not a crisis. What makes it a crisis is we can't control the process or how soon, if ever, our circumstances will change. Small steps are all you have to reduce the fear and increase your actions. Okay, so I'll need your help trying to make another point about Kaizen. I'll put something up on the screen, ask you to raise your hand if you think it's large and important innovation or small and trivial Kaizen. So suppose during breakfast I held up a metal knife and we're talking about the election or something else, and all of a sudden I interrupt you quite rudely and I say, wait a minute, hold on a second. You teach us in physics class that atoms are always in motion. If that's the case, how could this knife be solid? Would you think to yourself, my God, the edge brings in the brightest people. I wish I thought big thoughts like that. Or would you sit there and think to yourself, doesn't this man have anything more important to worry about? When was the last time you read a newspaper? How many think that's a large, important thought? Innovation? How many think it's pretty small and trivial? Some of you aren't playing. The stirrup, you know that thing you put your foot in on the side of the saddle? How many think it's one of the great inventions in the history of the world? Innovation? Thanks for playing. How many think it's small and trivial? Thanks. Okay, a few more. Falling in love. How many of you is love at first sight? Innovation? How many was it a series of small steps over time? And how many of you don't want to talk about it? Some health habit, whether it was smoking, drinking, whatever it was, one day you woke up and you said, that's it. And you gave up smoking, gave up drinking, and kept your word. How many of you would consider that a big, bold step? Okay? How many of you would consider even that a series of small steps? Some of you. And lastly, you come up to me afterwards, you say, Bob, what do you like doing in your free time? I say, bird beaks. You say, what? Yeah, I just find bird beaks fascinating. Hey, this was a nice group till just a moment ago. How many of you think that's a large, important way to spend your time? Thanks a lot. How many think it's pretty trivial? Now, what am I getting at with these silly questions? Well, Richard Feynman, like Einstein, asked himself that question one day while bored, The brain thought it over and in its own way popped out some answers. He even thought the answers were trivial. The Nobel Prize Committee in Physics did not agree with him, awarding them their prize and changing the course of atomic physics. We have to assume whoever invented the stirrup didn't think they were changing the course of world history, but they did. At the time, there were literally hundreds of small villages in Europe, none of any great distinction. Those lords who could see the implication of a stirrup had the resources now to train a soldier to sit on a horse holding a lance braced by a stirrup, became the nuclear powers of their day and dominated Europe until gunpowder came along. Falling in love, as you know, can be either. The research on health habits argues that even for people who have made those big leaps, and some of you in the room are probably testimony to those leaps, in every case it seemed to be preceded by weeks, months, or years of contemplation, consideration, discussion, and debate before the brain made the big leap that one morning. And a young naturalist on the HMS Beagle named Charles Darwin noticed that one species of finch on two separate islands in the Galapagos had different shaped bird beaks. He mulled it over for 25 years and gave us the theory of natural selection. So what's the point of this other than not to trust me again? The point is we have this hallucination, this delusion, this fantasy, this myth, this belief that we can control the size of the result by controlling the size of the step. When the reality is we have no control what at the end of the day will turn out to be large and important, and what at the end of the day will turn out to be small and trivial. Small steps have an equal, sometimes greater chance of creating the large result, as do big steps. Now that you don't trust me at all, let's try one more quiz. The laser, anyone consider this Kaizen? Trivial and inconsequential. What about the radio? Trivial? What about the computer? Some days we wish it were. And the transistor, anyone consider these small trivial steps? Well, the people at the Bell Laboratories did not even apply for a patent for over 3 years for the laser, saw no practical use for it whatsoever. Marconi thought the radio would only be useful if the telegraph failed. Alexander Graham Bell thought the only use we'd ever have for his telephone would be to call you to tell you there's a telegraph waiting. True story. People who invented the computer, you may know, tried to sell the patent to IBM, who president and CEO at the time turned it down, saying, quote, I think there's a world market for about 5 computers, unquote. In all fairness, a PC was about the size of this room, and IBM was doing a fine job selling us what? Typewriters, and they worked just fine. Don't you miss them some days? And the transistor, people who invented it thought it would only have one possible use, and that was in hearing aids, did not realize they had just made computers possible. So again, we have no idea what at the end of the day will turn out to be large and important, and what at the end of the day will turn out to be small and trivial. Small steps have an equal, sometimes greater chance of getting us where we're going. So there's 2 times to use Kaizen. If you decide you want to take the big steps, you can afford it financially or, more importantly, emotionally. That's great. If it doesn't succeed, then you fall back on a second strategy. And the other time to use Kaizen is after innovation succeeds. The only way you can continue to succeed as anything is through small, trivial steps. Let me give you just one example. Probably the best researcher on marriage in the world is a gentleman named John Gottman and his team at the University of Washington Medical School, where they can sit you down for a 15-minute interview, you and your fiance, we have some engaged people here, and predict the likelihood you'll be happily married 4 years later, the average length of a marriage in the United States today. You can predict the likelihood you'll be happily married 4 years later with 93% accuracy. Now, to take his 1,700 pages of data and reduce it to a few sentences, he found 2 things. One is how couples deal with conflict, not surprising. The other is that he found positive attention outweighed negative by 5 to 1 on a daily basis. What is he talking about? 5 candlelight dinners? 5 breakfasts at the edge? It's not physically possible. He found it was these small, trivial moments during the day. When you call your mate during the day, does their voice light up when they realize it's you, or does their voice imply that you're interrupting their more important tasks? Do they put down the remote control, the newspaper, the telephone when you come through the door? If you went to the dentist this morning, did they remember to ask you about it tonight? These small, trivial moments accumulated over the day were more predictive of success than virtually anything else the couple could do. Okay, so now for a long time we thought Kaizen and innovation were completely separate. Let me give you an illustration of what you could only call innovation. When Disney finally succeeded in making and selling those short black and white cartoons many of you have seen, he bet every penny he had or could borrow on a project that everyone thought was the dumbest idea they ever heard of. In Hollywood, they were calling it Walt's Folly. He called it Snow White. If they thought it was the most ridiculous idea, who on earth would ever want to go see a full-length animated cartoon? Ridiculous. If it hadn't succeeded, Disney would have been penniless, and no one in the room would know his name. You can only call that innovation a huge step. For he and his family, the stakes enormous. When Boeing went from military to commercial aircraft, which nobody was asking them to build, they too bet every penny they had or could borrow on their first commercial airline. If it hadn't succeeded, nobody in the room would remember Boeing. You can only call that innovation. And I thought it was just that simple till I came across a rather painful statistic in the paper. How many of you remember the Value Jet crash in Florida? 160 some odd people lost their lives in the Everglades. Well, it said in the paper it took Value Jet 3 times to reach the same size that Southwest Airlines took 25 years to reach. Southwest, you may know, by almost any measure, the most successful airline on the planet. 32 years now a profit, 32 years without a fatality, an extraordinary record. When Southwest started, what was their dream? San Antonio, Dallas, Houston. That's as far as their dream took them. And through a series of small incremental steps, they built not only a national network, but along the way learned not just how to manage money, hedge funds for their oil, how to communicate, but more critically, small steps for how to keep people motivated, passionate, and committed to this task. Through that small incremental process, they built this incredibly successful organization. ValueJet, in their haste to get big, did not develop those skills, and the result was a disaster by any arithmetic. So taking nothing away from the courage of Boeing or Disney, they fit the pattern of successful organizations that spent years developing a set of skills for managing people, managing technology, managing whatever else they needed to do before they made these big leaps. And those skills that Boeing and Disney developed before those leaps made it more likely they would succeed and continue to succeed. So we think Kaizen and innovation are not separate, but cousins. Just to give you one illustration, this is currently, it seems, is the best-selling business book in U.S. history. They look at 11 Fortune 500 companies that for 15 years were at the stock market average, next 15 years, 7 times the stock market average, comparing them to companies that stayed average for that whole 30-year window. Just one quote from the book. We kept thinking we'd find the one big thing, the miracle moment that defined breakthrough. We even pushed for it in our interviews. But the good to great executives simply could not pinpoint a single key event or moment in time that exemplified the transition. Frequently, they chafed against the whole idea of allocating points and prioritizing factors. In every good to great company, at least one of the interviewees gave an unprompted admonishment, saying something along the lines of, look, you can't dissect this thing into a series of nice little boxes and factors, or identifying moment of aha, or the one big thing. It was a whole bunch of interlocking pieces that built one upon another. No matter how dramatic the end result, the good to great transformation never happened in one fell swoop. There was no single defining action, no grand program, no one killer innovation, no solitary lucky break, no wrenching revolution. Good to great comes about by a cumulative process, step by step, action by action, decision by decision, turn by turn of the flywheel that adds up to sustained and spectacular results. So we go from the notion, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, to the notion, by the yard it's hard, by the inch it's a cinch. Again, Pat Riley, months later we got taught a simple truth: anytime you stop striving to get better, you're bound to get worse. In life, there's no such thing as holding on to what you got. But again, the striving we're talking about here is not the desperate leaps, but small, trivial steps. A couple more points before we close, and that is the 3 things that make Kaizen hard, and the reason I felt it was necessary to take people through the research to overcome our kind of Western notion that big steps are the fastest way. One is it takes enormous self-esteem. Let me give you one example of this. Because many of us are hard on ourselves, and if we are, that harsh voice is not going to tolerate small steps. Let me just illustrate it this way. How many of you would consider rejection painful? Can I see a show of hands? I'm going to try and convince you that that's not possible. Ready? Would you consider romantic rejection right up there as one of the most painful? Yes? Okay, let's be scientific about this. Let's agree on a definition for that. I go up to you and I say, would you like to go out with me Saturday night? And you say, you know, I'd like to, Bob, but I'm busy flossing. And I walk away. That's rejection. That hurts. Yes? Okay. Let's see if, in fact, that's what happened. I went up to Sandy. Sandy, she said she's busy flossing. As I walked away, did the following conversation occur, spontaneously and unrehearsed, in the center of my head. Boy, am I proud of you. Nice try. That was gutsy. Could have been a little smoother. Next time we do better. I am so proud of you for trying. All the time, the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, 400 little voices in the center of my head singing the Hallelujah chorus. from Handel's Messiah, because of my willingness to live at risk and pursue my dreams. Door number 1 as I walked away, or door number 2. Boy, do you sound like a jerk. Who'd want to go out with you? You're ugly, you're fat, nobody wants you anyway. Your version of 1 or 2. For many of us, 2, yes? So where was the pain? In Sandy saying no, or the conversation in my head walking away? Now, how that voice gets there and how to get rid of it's a topic for another day. But if you've got a harsh voice in your head, that harsh voice is not going to tolerate small steps. Whatever it's angry at you about, whether it's weight or relationship or finances, whatever it's beating you up for today, it's not going to be satisfied by the results tomorrow. That's way too late. Today is almost too late. It would rather have the result yesterday. Small trivial steps are not going to feed that King Kong in our head. So it takes enormous self-esteem. Just a couple more of this, and then I want to close with a couple comments. It takes optimism. The steps are so small, they offer no evidence you're going to get there. What you're counting on with Kaizen is it seems to be the way the brain programs itself best, is through small incremental steps. By taking the small step, the brain makes the big leap itself. How many of you remember the exact moment when you mastered driving? You all vaguely remember getting behind the wheel of that the first day, wondering how you were going to steer, shift, brake, and deal with traffic. And at a certain point, you're no longer even thinking about driving anymore. You're listening to the radio or anticipating what's going to happen at your destination. And the brain is driving you to work by itself. The brain learned it in incremental steps, correct? You started in grocery store parking lots, and through a series of small incremental steps, the brain made the big leap itself. We think that's the key to Kaizen, among other things. And it takes a sense of purpose, because Kaizen will take you wherever you're going. So you want to have a sense of purpose or focus that allows you to use it in an effective way. I just want to say a couple things in closing about this, and that is that the reason we wrote this is the most famous use of it is with Toyota and firms like it that swear this is the reason they've become and stay successful. But we couldn't find anything in the literature where people could use it in their health or relationship. But I want to take a moment in closing and talk about the price we pay as a culture, as organizations, as communities, for our focus on innovation. Think back to the last couple days of your life, all the people you interacted with, those under the roof with you, those other cars on the highway trying to get to their destination as well, people in grocery stores, restaurants, people waiting on us, places you took your dry cleaning, as you walk through public areas of buildings, people on the phone, and the same thing on the way home. If you were 100% convinced that even the smallest of those interactions, whether you thank the waiter in a restaurant or the person that you're dry cleaning to, whether you let somebody in your lane or not, or tailgated or not, if you were convinced that how you treated those individuals could have changed the course of their life and the lives of everyone they interacted with, how many of you might have done a few things differently over the course of that 48 hours? Can I see a show of hands? Practically all of us. Now, can I tell you that whether you let somebody in your lane or take the time to compliment someone who's checking you out in a grocery store for their blouse or their hair, that you're going to change their life? Of course not. But if you don't go through the day with that assumption, that even the smallest of moments can impact people, what's the alternative belief? That most of those moments simply aren't important enough to pay attention to. We all have relationships we put in the innovative category. People we live with, family members, important clients, people who loom large enough in our lives that on our best days they get the love and attention they deserve. But there's so many other moments during the day where we lose that opportunity to touch people's lives. And I ask you, which would serve us, which would serve the people we interacted with, which would help our communities if we treated every moment as sacred and precious or waited just for the important ones? This is not a new concept. It goes back as far as spiritual teachings. I just want to end with a couple quotes. One from Mother Teresa, who was asked why she was going to Beirut after a huge bombing there where 3 Red Cross workers had been killed. She was going to help a dozen spastic children. And they asked why she was risking her life and why doing something so small when there were so many large problems. And she said, "Small things with great love. It is not how much we do, but how much love we put into doing. And it is not how much we give, but how much love we put into giving. To God, there's nothing small." And on the last day of World War II, the Jews of Brinden took the gold from their teeth and made Oskar Schindler a ring. And in it, they put the ancient Jewish phrase, "He who saves a single soul saves the world entire." Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Wow. what a wonderfully inspiring talk. It just gives you a new way, it gives me a new way to really think about living my life.